Mock Draft 3.0. Welcome to the Just Baseball Show. It is Tuesday, July 2nd. You got the king of the mock drafts, Arm Layton, and I am here to ask as many questions as possible. My name is Peter Apple. We're going to go through the entire first round. I also have tons of questions about biggest risers, biggest fallers. We're going to go pick by pick. This is going to be a banger of an episode, and it is all brought to you by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. Remember, folks, download the BetMGM app on iOS or Android and use code JUSTBASEBALL. Why? First bet offer up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if you lose. So what does that mean? Well, if you download the BetMGM app, put in code JUSTBASEBALL when you deposit, your first bet, if it loses, you will get up to $1,500 back in bonus bets. It's an absolute no-brainer if you're looking to put a little coin potentially on the number one overall pick or any futures or any day-by-day games that you have. But remember, gambling problem, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 or older. Terms and conditions apply. Aram, how's your mental right now? Are you tired? Is it like a little bit of adrenaline still running so your brain is going but your body's tired? Or are you just full-fledged fired up? How are you?
It's a great question because I'm in the trenches for the draft right now. Like this is it. This is the first time where I've really wanted to just kind of level up the draft coverage that we've been providing. And I'm like, okay, I put all this time into regular prospects at the professional level. Like, why not do the same on the draft side? I just haven't really had the time in the past, and I'm going to make the time. So not only are we doing the mock draft, and the more exhausting part about the mock draft is you're having to reach out to so many different people because it's not just about your assessment of the players. It's like, what's going on? Like, what's some of the buzz, from this team, what's some of the buzz from this team, and, agents that represent some of these players, like, where do they think that their player is going to end up? And of course, there's so much there's so many smoke screens. There's so much that goes into it. So I know mock draft is ever very accurate in the grand scheme, if you're comparing it to like anything else, right? Like, good mock drafts in the NFL, I used to keep track where like Mel Kiper and those guys would get like 8 and it was like a good one, 9 and it was a good one. And the 2 or 3 are always a layup. So that part has been interesting. But what's been really more exhausting but really exciting and fun has been diving into them as prospects now, like watching the video the same way I do as, when we're putting the top 100 together. And this will be the first year that we'll have a draft prospect rankings that should be out in the next like week or two. So that's what I've been spending like all of my free time that I have trying to dive into and put together.
I have a question before we start getting into the draft. Is there an element of, right, you're talking about smoke screens, you're talking about agents potentially saying, yeah, I think this player will go here, maybe a little bit higher than you might expect, or maybe a little bit lower. Have you heard things during this draft cycle? Because you're analyzing these players. Are you hearing things during this draft cycle where, oh, this guy is getting a lot of steam, and you're left wondering, well, why? Because I don't think he's very good. Or on the flip side, are there guys who are dropping where you're thinking to yourself, that doesn't make any sense?
It's funny. It's almost like I feel as though so much of it is just everyone trying to like find whispers and listen to whispers that like if a few people start catching on to that, then it gets louder and louder. Jack gave the analogy of kind of like gently tapping on a drum and then how it'll like reverberate and get louder and louder. That's how some of those things have been happening. It almost makes me think like, no, that like Jack Caglione to the White Sox. I think there was think a litany. Like I think there was a wave of like 4 mock drafts in a row across different outlets that had Caglione to the White Sox, and he visited with them apparently, and that makes sense. But I'm like, okay, if everyone's hearing that much Cags to the White Sox, now it almost makes me feel like it's not going to happen. So like it's almost like you almost start thinking yourself into a hole with the way that it goes. But honestly, we'll talk about it. But one of the things that I think continues to just come up now is that Charlie Condon might not be like this can't miss guy. There's no such thing, but like it might not be that clear cut. And Jack Caglione might be a guy that really started to endear himself more and more. That not that he wasn't before, but like you start to compare those two guys, and there's scouts out there that like Cags better. And so like it's not just really having. I'd love to have a source in every single front office. Of course, we don't. But when you have a bunch of different scouts maybe saying the same thing, you'd have to imagine that the teams in the front offices probably feel a similar way. So it's a lot of educated guessing, but I'd say that's the big trend of like what I've been hearing is that I think a lot of the concerns around Cags as a hitter, I think have been quelled and or at least compared to Condon, and people are saying, well, you could have the same concerns about Condon too. So I think that's been the interesting trend here is like, hey, I think we're almost a little numb to what Cags can do and has already done, even though Charlie Condon has been spectacular.
Before we get into this draft, I want to talk to our listeners. So if you are listening to this currently on audio on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, first of all, if you could leave a 5-star review, that would be awesome. But I highly recommend going over to YouTube, or at least if you're listening on audio, to go to justbaseball.com and follow along because it's written on justbaseball.com and you'll see more highlights, us go through the draft on YouTube. So this is a really good one to watch or follow along on justbaseball.com if you are listening to audio. So for all those folks on YouTube, hit the big red subscribe button. We're coming out with Mock Draft 4.0. Arm's going to have draft rankings. And also, we're just going to keep covering MLB on this channel. So make sure you hit that big red subscribe button. Aram, my first question, these are a couple of softballs just to get us in gear. Number one, who are the biggest risers since Mock Draft 1.0 or 2.0? Because this is the third edition of the Mock Draft. Who's kind of the one, maybe another guy who have just been steadily climbing?
I'd say James Tibbs, another guy that was just kind of producing, and not that anybody was ignoring it. I'm sure Florida State fans would be like, oh, we've been talking about Tibbs for a while, but it was Cam Smith, who also has climbed a little bit too. But Tibbs, I mean, ACC Player of the Year, outfielder, left-handed hitter, sweet swing. And I think all of a sudden now people are starting to really take him more seriously as a draft prospect because you have this tier one group of guys that, we'll talk about. And, I think you could probably guess who the tier one is. Then tier two, it gets interesting. And you can kind of have, each of the tier two prospects have their own flaws and have their own strengths. And I think Tibbs is as well-rounded of the tier two college bats as you're going to find. And I think, for teams that are looking maybe for a bargain deal earlier in the draft or, are hoping that a college bat slips to them at 12, 13, 14 in the middle of the first round, Tibbs, I think, is appealing on multiple fronts to a lot of teams. And that's why I could see him going high under slot or being someone that, a team is thrilled to have fall into their lap in the middle of the first.
And then unfortunately, we got to talk about the fallers, right? Because as some guys rise, other guys fall. So from Mock Draft 1.0 to 2.0 now to 3.0, who's a player that you've noticed that keeps trickling down your board?
Big one was Mike Sirota from Northeastern. That he was a guy that was expected to potentially be a top 10 pick. And last time we put a mock out, it was tough to gauge. You're hoping he was going to turn the season around. Usually guys that start slow, that are that talented, they'll get going in some way. And he just really didn't quite get going. He's a good outfielder. There's a lot to still like in his game, but with all of the other collegiate bats and with some of the, prepsters that are projected to go in the back half of the first round, it seems like Sirota and his lack of projection and lack of performance started to play him out of the first round. And that was a guy that, again, was being mocked by a lot in the top 10 for sure. And definitely in the first round. And, now I'd be pretty shocked if he went in the first.
So those two guys, based on your conversations with scouts and front office members and, people in that community, those guys are rising and falling down this official mock draft list. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with James Tibbs getting a ton of steam and Mike Sirota kind of falling out a little bit?
Yeah, I do. And those, I think, I think on Sirota, it was just more like, hey, like he's not performing. And honestly, I had some concerns data wise going into the year, but I was like, all right, well, maybe I'm overthinking it. A lot of people really love him. And then kind of validated that. And I doubt I was alone. So, when you have some of those concerns and then they kind of come to fruition, that's always going to make a guy sink a little bit quicker. So unfortunately, I do kind of think it's valid. With Tibbs, I also think it's valid because I mean, you watch what this guy did, down the stretch and in the postseason. Then you look at the swing; he's got a rocket from the corner outfield. Yeah, I've seen him, mocked in the top 10, and there's a chance that like the Angels could be interested in him in an under slot spot at 8. I think that it gets a little bit far there. I've even heard him floated in the top 5 as an under slot. That's where I think it gets a little bit aggressive because like he's good, but Braden Montgomery, for example. Like I just think you're basically taking a lot of what Tibbs does and leveling up, pushing the sliders up a little bit further. So I think it gets a little bit ambitious when teams start, or scouts start floating him, and just people start floating him as a guy that could go earlier than that Angels 8 pick for savings. But again, you never know.
You never know. Let's get into the draft. But we're going to start with the supplemental and compensation picks because those are at the tail end of the first round. They're technically not first round picks, but they kind of are, right? You got the first 30 picks, and then you have 6 to 9 different picks. Can you explain to our audience like the supplemental, the compensation round before we get into some of the most exciting players that you think will be drafted there?
Yeah, it's fun. So like there's always been the compensation aspect based on, they're not always, but for a while, compared to some of the newer ways that you can get compensation picks. One, and the more common that we've had for several years now is you have the qualifying offer that you give to an impending free agent. And if he signs for at least $50 million, you'll be awarded a compensation pick in the A section. So that would be the Minnesota Twins. They lost Sonny Gray after giving him a qualifying offer, so they have the 33rd overall selection. But then you have more recently the prospect promotion incentive picks, which are awesome as well. And you got the D-backs picking at 31 because Corbin Carroll won Rookie of the Year after being on the opening day roster. And you have the Orioles picking at 32 because Gunnar Henderson won Rookie of the Year. So those are 2 picks that come in there. And then where it gets a little bit like more complicated, and I don't even totally understand it, is the competitive balance round A. And I'll just read it to you. This is after the qualifying offer picks. You have a handful here: the Brewers, the D-backs, the Guardians, the Pirates, the Rockies, and the Royals. And this is how MLB defines it. All teams that have either one of the 10 smallest markets or 10 smallest revenue pools receive an additional pick at the end of the first or second round. The groups of teams alternate between the 2 rounds each year. So if you're wondering like why the Marlins aren't there, they were there last year. So now they're in the competitive balance round B, which would be after the second round. So a way to try to compete, like just create more parity in baseball, smaller market teams getting an extra pick. It's interesting. But at the end of the day, like it does make some sense, considering that, we already have a lot of issues with parity and spending in baseball.
So even though most of the owners of these quote unquote small market teams, right, the Kansas City Royals are so small market that the Kansas City Chiefs continue to win Super Bowls every single year, they get rewarded for not spending money.
Essentially, I think there's I got to dive more into like what goes into them determining quote unquote what the smallest markets are. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of a bailout because it's smallest revenue pools too. And like, if you don't invest in your team, of course your revenue pool is going to be small. Why would anybody go see the Marlins play baseball right now? The Rockies are an interesting one to be in there because they do pretty well from a ticket sales perspective. So yeah, it is kind of that double-edged sword where it's like, you want to create parity. It's the same thing with revenue sharing. Like, why are we incentivizing these teams to not try harder to spend? And that's the part that gets a little frustrating.
That could be a conversation for another day because I don't think fans, especially of those small market teams, are concerned
No,
why
they're not.
they got in. They just want to know who the hell are they going to pick. So let's go through these compensation and supplemental picks. We got 9 of them from picks 31 to 39, or that might be 8. I don't know where my math is right now, but there's a lot of big names, a lot of guys who we've seen in college baseball this year, from Jonathan Santucci of Duke, Dakota Jordan of Mississippi State, Billy Amick of Tennessee, and there's some high school guys in there. It seems like a pretty loaded supplemental compensation round grouping. Who are the most exciting guys that you think will go in this little cluster?
I had a lot of fun with trying to figure out like what the Guardians could do at 36, because Cash Mayfield, left-handed pitcher, really interesting late bloomer, and kind of flew up late. Guy that I think is super intriguing. 6'4", great mechanics. The reason why I think he could slip a little bit is he's older for the class, 19 years old, and draft models tend to hate that. But it's hard to argue against the results. The Guardians, as we'll get to the top of the draft, like we have them underslotting at the number 1 pick. They do that. They have the largest pool. They can get creative there. I think Mayfield is a back end of the first round talent, At the very least, I think you could even justify him a little bit earlier than that. And if the Guardians say, "Hey, we pick at 36 and we've got a million plus in savings, we can give you, two and a half or more at that 36th pick if you hang tight." He's slipping to 36 here, but he's going to be getting in this theoretic, outcome here. I think more money than if he were selected at 26, 27, wherever. And the Guardians did something similar to that last year and spent $2.5 million. I think 2.6 was the number to get Alex Clemmie, a very intriguing lefty that's 18 years old with loud stuff. So I could see them doing something similar here and getting a really fun left-hander who I think is the second best prep lefty in the class pretty clearly.
So do you think he has the most upside of any of these supplemental picks? Because there's a lot of really sound college players, but are you opting more for the upside of the
I,
high
I
school left-hander?
I think if you go pure upside, like Dakota Jordan and his 70 power, he's a weird player for me. And we got him 33 to the Twins because Dakota Jordan, like turns in plus run times, but he's not a great defender in a corner, and he's not a base stealer. He
Weird.
has some of the highest EVs in college baseball, and you're hoping that maybe he can translate that into game speed more. But Jordan's a guy that I could see going late in the first, and I could see slipping. But in terms of upside, I mean, he's got the power to hit 30 plus home runs, no problem. So I'd say he probably has the most upside of that group. But I think the arguably the most well-rounded prospect, both upside and polish in this group, is probably a Cash Mayfield. And he's probably the best prospect in a vacuum. If we were doing our big board, he'd probably be ranked ahead of all these guys.
Fascinating. So we're going to go 5 picks each until we get to the top 10. So more of the grouping stage, 30 to 26, 25 to 21, 20 to 16, 15 to 11. And then we'll go through each individual in the top 10. Before we do that, which teams have a type? Like, are there any draft trends that we should remember? Notably, you're talking about Dakota Jordan right now. I'm a Yankee fan. I know that the Yankees continually are trying to invest in the guys who just have massive exit velos, most notably Spencer Jones in last year's draft, that has turned out to be a really good pick for them in the first round. I'm curious, actually, that wasn't last draft. That was George Lombard Jr., but it's kind of the same thing. He had a similar profile. Is there trends here? Or when you're going through all of these different teams, have you noticed that this team does this almost every single time? Like, what are those trends?
Yeah, I think there definitely are. And of course, right when you think they're gonna zig, they'll zag. And that's what makes the draft so unique. But like the Braves have taken a pitcher 5 straight years. Sometimes it's college, sometimes it's high school, but they've taken a pitcher 5 straight years. And it's worked out for them. I mean, we're still seeing it in real time. Schwellenbach's been up there and all of a sudden pitching big innings for them. He wasn't even their first round pick. So they're going arms, sometimes 2 out of their first 3 picks. But in the first round, they've gone pitcher the last 5 years. The Padres, they go prep, like they go high school pretty much all the time. I think they've gone the prep route with their last 7 first round picks.
Wow.
Think about that. And I think that's part of the reason. I think part of the reason is because Preller's such a good scout and their department's so good that they feel like there's more diamonds in the rough to identify, out of the high school crop. And I mean, look at it. I look at what they're doing right now. Jackson Merrill is one of the best rookies in Major League Baseball, and James Wood is about to get called is getting called up right now to go play for the Nationals, and both of those guys are in the same class. So they clearly do some good stuff. Lean into what you're good at, and I think the Padres are a very very frequent trend of going for those prep guys, and I think they'll continue to do it and probably make it 8 in a row this year. And then I'd say with the Dodgers, just like very risk tolerant. Like they'll swing for the fences. They don't care. They're not looking for guys that they can fast track. And I think that's fun. But I've seen them not really care too much about stuff versus command. Like they'll just go for the stuff. Like they don't need pitchability guys. Same with if they go hitters, like they like tools. Those are the things that, I've definitely picked up on, and we'll get to the top. Like there's some trends when we talk about some of the mocks there. But those are some of the obvious ones in the back end of the first. And I think the Phillies, I think this would make it a trend this year, but they have definitely had a bit of an affinity for high schoolers, and they've definitely taken advantage of the opportunities to get high upside power right-handers. Andrew Painter, Mick Abel, most recently being examples.
Let's get into these prep arms, and we'll enter into the first round. So among picks 30 to 26, I see 2 high school right-handed pitchers back to back. It's Ryan Sloan and William Schmidt. In Mock Draft 2.0, you had Schmidt a little bit higher at pick 21. and Sloan at pick 28. And you also had Cash Mayfield, who we already talked about, left-handed prep arm, fall out of the first round into that compensation supplemental grouping. What's the scoop on these high school arms?
Yeah, they're really talented. I just think this is not like some other years where um I think these guys are not quite as highly touted as some of the other top high school arms that we've seen in previous years. It's not as clear cut. And for that reason, I think teams might be willing to sit back or, instead of reaching a little bit for the perceived top, prep arm, top right-handed prep arm, they might just say, hey, I don't think there's a huge difference between a couple of these guys. We're going to sit back and wait. But I also could see a team falling in love with what William Schmidt can do, which is a mid-90s heater with good characteristics and a curveball that is over 3,000 RPM and take him earlier. Like I do ultimately think that one of these prep arms is going to go earlier than a lot of people may have expected. And I think this is kind of the low end for them. But just going through the ways that I could see this play out, I think it's more of just the way that there's so many college bats. A lot of teams are more interested in bats and said to be hunting bats right now. So I just could see a scenario where there's a runoff of collegiate bats and position players in general. And all of a sudden, some of these really intriguing high school arms end up slipping. But I do like Schmidt a lot. I could see him going as high as the middle of the first round, to be honest. And I think Ryan Sloan is another really fun arm that there's been a lot more talent coming out of Illinois. He's another big guy at 6'5", 220. And I think can get up to triple digits, already has an advanced feel for a changeup. So that's where you could see a Guardians team liking that. Maybe certain teams that really do prioritize those pitchers that have an advanced feel for a changeup. That could be a guy that ends up going a little bit earlier as well.
So I feel like I know you pretty well. And I feel like sometimes I could read between the lines through your write-ups. I think you're a big William Schmidt guy. Based on, and it's just a short paragraph. And maybe I'm reading too far into it, but I see a mid-90s heater with a 3,000 plus RPM breaking ball. You're a big Jackson Jobe guy.
Yeah.
Not that far off from what he looked like coming out of high school as well. And you're talking about him potentially gaining more steam going up into the middle part of the first round. You still have him going 26 to the Yankees. Do you think as more teams start to unravel the data that he could be a sneaky riser in this draft?
For sure. I think this is kind of the floor. Like this is just like the scenario that I saw like when I wanted to try. Like I think there's a few different ways that this can go, right? Like where one or two picks in one area create a domino effect. And so I was like, all right, well, here's the domino effect in this mock draft that I think is going to happen. And in this domino effect, Schmidt ends up slipping. I think he's a guy that could go as high as, to be honest, like it wouldn't shock me if he went as high as 13 to the Giants, depending if Caminiti goes earlier. But I think there's a lot of teams that could have interest in him. But yeah, you are right. Like I like him a lot. I like what he can do on the mound. Southern kid too. I think that the track record's been pretty impressive already. And 6'4" with more room to add. Like it's a pretty lean frame, and he commands his stuff already pretty well. I could see a team falling in love with him, and if you could save a few bucks too, in an earlier pick, I think easily we could see him going earlier than this.
I'll be real. I was slightly aroused when I saw that he was going 26 to my New York Yankees. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to lie to our audience. I was slightly titillated. But let's move into picks 25 through 21. The one that stands out to me, the switch pitcher, Durangelo Zinja. I think I pronounced that correctly. Who's been up to 99 miles an hour from the right side and 95 from the left side. He was not a first rounder in Mock Draft 2.0. Where is the steam coming from? Because when you look at how you've ranked these guys based on just where they're getting picked, he's going to be one of the top college arms drafted, even though he had an ERA near 4 at Mississippi State last year. But there's so much to like in the profile, isn't there?
Yeah, and like just got better and better and better as the year went on. It could kind of go any way with him too. It's interesting because he hasn't pitched that much. He's really only been pitching. Yeah, like 2 years and with both arms. I think realistically, as a pro, he's a righty. But again, like if you have a guy that you can roll out there, he can definitely go be competitive with the left arm. I think he's a lot better from the right side. when you look at what he was able to do from a workload perspective, held his velo all year. And again, got better and better, more swings and misses as the year progressed, and how raw he is in terms of just the experience compared to others. It's legitimately 5 pitches he can throw for a strike as well, or at least has shown flashes of being able to fastball, slider, changeup, curve, and a cutter that whole mix in. Like teams are going to look at him and say, like, wow, this is like a canvas that we can just continue to paint on and develop and turn into this beautiful illustration, because like he is so baseline at this point where it's really, I think, to have 5 pitches given how little he's actually thrown, already have the feel for the changeup, fastball, I mean, from the right side sitting in the mid 90s. Like I feel like you look at that and you say, okay, what can we build off of this? The flip side is he's not the biggest guy in the world. Some teams may, not love that he may not be able to handle like a workload because of the size. I always thought that that's always been something that's overblown, and I think he's been able to prove that, hey, I can handle a workload. And 100 pitches in his last time out, 7 innings, he averaged 95 and a half with the fastball. So like clearly he can handle it. I think teams are starting to care less and less about the height and size thing. And I think it's a perfect fit with the Braves for a guy that I do think can climb quickly because of how quickly he's going to be able to get on a professional weight program, get in a professional setting where he's going to, I think, unlock some things that he hasn't even really been able to unlock yet, being that he's so young in the grand scheme of pitching.
Let's move to picks 20 through 16. I love this little grouping that you have. 3 college hitters, Vance Honeycutt, Christian Moore, and Seaver King. We saw both Honeycutt and Christian Moore in Omaha. Didn't see Seaver King, but we saw Seaver King just destroy baseballs for Wake Forest this year, who is obviously a great team in college baseball. You have them kind of ranked back to back to back. If you were running the front office for a team and you had these 3 guys available, who's your pick?
Between Cam Smith, Seaver King, and Christian Moore?
No, Seaver King, Vance Honeycutt, and Christian.
Ooh. So Honeycutt's an interesting one because I would venture to say that he will probably be I have to do some diving into this historically, but I don't know how many first rounders have had a strikeout rate above 25% in being drafted in the first round out of college. There's a very, very short list, if at all. And Honeycutt, because he's such a wizard defensively, because the power's there, the way he finished the year, he's expected to go in this range. The Rays are also very risk averse with their picks. They go tools over everything. And like team that employs Jose Siri, I think would love a player that I like to comp to Jose Siri to a degree. For me, like I like him. If in the first round, I want a guy that's a little bit more well-rounded with a little bit less risk. Christian Moore's kind of the flip side where crazy power, really fun bat, but second base, not a ton of defensive utility there. And I feel like Seaver King's kind of a middle ground where he can play shortstop, he can play center field. You got to figure out kind of what his long-term defensive home is. But this is a guy that transferred from Division II to Wake Forest, and they moved him all over the diamond. I think if you focus him on a specific area, he'll continue to develop there. But he could also be a guy that plays both and can be this really fun super utility type. He does have some swing, or I would say some approach questions, given how aggressive he is. And sometimes when I was watching, there was some pitch recognition challenges, but the bat to ball was there. And I mean, it's hard to argue against the numbers, especially first year making the leap to Division I. So I lean Seaver King because this is a draft where you don't have a lot of positional value. It's a lot of bat first guys, especially bat first college guys. That's why I like Honeycutt. That's why I think Honeycutt's going to go in the first round and well into it. But I think Seaver King kind of gives you a little bit of everything with the feel to hit. He's put up great EVs. It's just a matter of pitch rec, which makes sense. He hasn't seen a lot of top flight competition and got better as the year went on in the ACC, and just finding out what the long-term defensive home is. But he's got the ability to play several different premium positions. I think you kind of get the best of everything with Seaver King.
And then in 15 and 14, just to finish up on this point, again, 2 more college hitters. At 15, you got the Mariners taking Carson Benj, an outfielder from Oklahoma State, and the Cubs taking third base from Florida State. His name is Cam Smith. Are those guys a tier above Seaver King? Or just relating it to back, you would take Seaver King over Honeycutt and over Christian Moore. Seaver King is 2 slots behind these guys, but is he gaining any steam for you?
I think they're all kind of in the same bucket here. I do like Benj a lot, and I do like Cam Smith a lot. I think if you're taking a census, like I think most people would interchange them in different ways and have them, in the same bucket. I do think Cam Smith is closer to the next tier than these other guys, just because of what he can do from a power perspective, from a hit perspective, and the fact that he can actually play, a good third base. I think Cam Smith does some really special things. I'm really excited about him. And I think Benj is one of the more underrated bats in the draft. I mean, there's a guy that can also, he's a legit prospect on the mound. I wouldn't do that, but it's just a testament to how talented he is. This guy ran his zone contact rate this year at like 92% in college baseball and can drive it out to all fields, really athletic hitter, can play a good center field. And again, we're talking about a draft that is short of guys that can play these premium positions. That's more why I have Benj just ahead. I also think Benj kind of fits the archetype of what the Mariners like to look for, generally speaking, a bit more than King with their first pick. But I do think that Cam Smith is might be a little bit ahead of these other guys with what he can do. Just I think from an output perspective and just the power hit combination is pretty special.
So we already kind of entered picks 15 through 11, but at pick number 13, you have the Giants selecting Cam Caminiti, a left-handed prep arm. So why is Cam Caminiti the best high school arm in this draft?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that stand out to me. He reclassified. So he's going to be still 17 years old on draft day, and his stock has just continued to ascend. Not just because he reclassified. And you're imagining like a Cash Mayfield's 19. Caminiti's going to be old 17 on draft day. So like, I mean, that's a big difference. Caminiti, fantastic athlete. His uncle Ken Caminiti obviously was a very good baseball player. A lot of baseball players in the family, but just every time you check in on this guy, throwing harder and harder, super athletic delivery, ridiculous field of spin. I think it's a release point that is going to play well at the professional levels. I think people are seeing how young he is, how advanced he is for his age, just the upward arrow where every time you check in, he gets better and better and better. And the combination of stuff and pitchability as the youngest, one of the youngest guys in the draft, I think teams are just going to be really excited to jump on a pitcher like this, especially in a draft that doesn't have a ton of prep guys expected to go pitching wise in the top 15. Seems like Caminiti is a no-brainer to be the first off the board pitching wise.
Let's get into pick number 10, and we'll go 10, 9, 8. We'll go through the entire first 10 picks. So you have at number 10, the Nationals selecting Trey Savage, right-handed pitcher out of ECU, one of my favorite arms in the class. I have already come out here and said, I feel like this guy's going to have a 3.7 ERA for the next 15 years. In my opinion, one of the safer arms in this draft. In Mock Draft 2.0, you had him going number 12 to the Boston Red Sox. Now he's approaching the top 10 with the Nationals. For Nationals fans, what are they getting here?
I mean, this is just a slam dunk pick for like he's one of those guys that could pretty much you could make sense of him going anywhere. Like he's a fit for anybody, a righty that can climb quickly. And it's a lot of similarities to the profile of Rhett Lauder in the respect that like fastball is good. I think his fastball is a little bit better than Lauder's, but then Lauder has two where you can go sinker and four seamer, but you have a decent fastball and then a ridiculous feel for multiple secondaries. His splitter is disgusting. Like that's going to be a pitch that is just going to be a problem for hitters right away at the big league level. His slider also performed extremely well. And then filling the zone up with both is extremely impressive. He'll mix in a cutter, he'll mix in a curveball. So just getting that kind of pitchability is what really stands out to me. And a guy that's going to fill up the zone and has still above average pitches across the board. I mean, opponents hit 078 against his changeup with a 194 OPS this past year. So like it is just silly what you can do with that pitch. And then also already having that slider present and the fastball still performing pretty well. You can fast track him. He's a high floor guy. And I still think there's some to dream on there too, as he just continues to learn how to sequence and maybe gains another tick. Fastball average 94 all year long though. It's a pick that I would make and sleep so soundly. It just seems like he's barring injury, which you can't really control with pitching. He's as safe as they come.
Is this a pick where you expect the Nationals to go with the pitcher, maybe with a college arm? or maybe even a prep arm, or is this the best guy available for the Nationals?
I honestly thought they could go bat here. They can kind of do anything, but when I think about where they're at and what I usually teams aren't drafting on need, and I don't think that this would necessarily be them drafting on need, but you just look at where they're at and who they have and what their org looks like, and you have a chance to grab a righty here that can just fly through the minors. It seems like a no-brainer. I could see them going with a college bat here too, though. Like Nick Kurtz could make a lot of sense there. You could even make sense out of James Tibbs. If somehow one of the high schoolers fall into their lap, like I wouldn't imagine them passing on a Connor Griffin if Griffin fell into their lap. I don't think he slips that far, but if he did, I'd imagine they end up going that route. They have very much like to go with the tools and upside. It hasn't always worked out for them, i.e. Elijah Green, but I think they would love to take another shot on a Connor Griffin type if he was there for them. But in this instance, he wouldn't be. And I think they would love to get clearly the third best arm in the draft here, I think, and definitely the third best college arm.
And at number 9, you have the Pirates taking the shot with Connor Griffin, an outfielder / shortstop prospect from Jackson Prep, Mississippi. Guy with some loud tools, probably the second best high school player in this draft, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, tools like crazy. This is a guy that we could look back and say, how did he go 9? He should have went top 3. He should have been the number 1 pick. But you could also see it go another direction where it's like, oof, why did they take him so early? How did no one know that he was going to whiff this much? And that's what comes with the high school guys. Like that's the challenge. He can legitimately play a great shortstop. He could play a great center field. He's 6'4". He flies. He's a legit prospect on the mound if you wanted him to be as well. The question is the hit tool, and the swing can be a little bit stiff. It's a little bit unorthodox at times. It's gotten better. It's so hard to predict, but teams are going to take that opportunity, I think, any day of the week when, you have a guy that does at least give you that defensive utility as well. I do have some concerns about the hit tool, but when you have plus power, plus speed, plus defense at multiple spots, I think you're willing to take a chance and be patient and see how things go bat to ball wise. And that's why I don't think he could slip much further than the 10 spot, and I don't really think the Pirates would pass on him at 9. They've also liked the prep ranks from time to time too.
And at number 8, you have the Angels taking Braden Montgomery, an outfielder out of Texas A&M, who we weren't able to see really in the College World Series because of the injury. But if you watched him during the regular season, you saw a rocket ship of a man, a guy who's also been on the mound. I don't think he's being drafted for that. I think it's mostly the bat. What would the Angels be getting in a guy like Braden Montgomery?
Well, we know they want guys that can climb quickly, right? And sure, there might be some swing and miss there relative to some of the other guys in this area, but for the most part, I mean, he's a guy that could definitely climb quickly. It's still a solid field to hit. It's ridiculous power. It's a good approach, and when we saw what the results were, as you mentioned, like this guy absolutely mashed. My one thing with him is like being a little bit more adjustable. He's strong and he can get a bit stiff with the secondary stuff, like adjusting to change ups down and things like that, but pulverizes fastballs, hit breaking balls well enough. And again, the pitch recognition is pretty good. This guy slashed 385, 490, 870 against fastballs this year. It's a profile that I think you feel pretty safe about as a power hitter in the corner. There's been talk about the Angels going under slot here. I wouldn't be shocked if they went like a Cam Smith there as well. But I'm just trying to imagine, like, okay, if the Angels don't go Montgomery, like, there's no way this guy slips beyond that. There's not really any concern about the injury, but that could create this slight domino where Braden would potentially be taken by the Pirates, and then that's where you see maybe a Connor Griffin go to the Nationals, and then that's where, of course, like the last couple of years, a great prospect falls into the Red Sox lap and they get Trey Savage or something. But I think the Angels would not pass up on the opportunity to get Braden Montgomery here, even if he ends up commanding the full slot value.
And at number 7, you have the Cardinals selecting Bryce Rayner, who's a two-way prospect out of Harvard Westlake High School. Again, a player with just crazy loud tools. I'm pretty surprised that the first high schooler off the board doesn't come until pick number 7. Is that more of a testament to the first 6 college guys? Is that more of just draft trends, what you expect the first 6 teams to do? Or is it you're a little bit worried about Bryce Rayner, the prospect himself? or is it a combination of all those?
I think it's I think it's a combination of a few things because the top prep guys, there's really two, in their own echelon here. And they're gonna have a pretty stiff price tag, I think, for that reason. Whereas in other drafts, like, it's like who is gonna go first? Yeah, tomorrow you got Jackson Holiday, you got Drew Jones, you got so there was conversation of several different guys, and you could kind of leverage that against them. Whereas I think these prep guys are in the driver's seat to a degree, but if a team doesn't want to quite meet that super high price tag, they'll just go the college route because you got some really sound offensive profiles collegiately ahead of there. I wouldn't be surprised if Bryce Rayner goes earlier. I think he's clearly the best prep prospect in this draft because you get the tools as you alluded to, but you also get some polish here. It's a guy that's hit the ball. We've seen him hit it, I think, in Cary, North Carolina, or one of the big invitational out there for high school. Hit 111. I mean, the other way, like, just crazy EVs already off his bat. A legit pitching prospect as well, but a good feel to hit, can play a really solid shortstop, sweet swing from the left side. I could see him going to the White Sox at 5. The White Sox have just been floated to be looking at the prep ranks as well. But in this scenario, they have someone fall into their lap that I think they wouldn't pass on. So I think for the Cardinals, they don't normally pick this high. And I don't think they plan on picking this high anytime soon again. So I could see them swinging for the fences a bit more. They also seem to love those, even if they don't want you to be a two-way player, the players that are capable of doing it. Mason Wynn, perfect example of that. Jordan Walker was a legit pitching prospect. And then even like Alec Burleson, he was never really taken seriously as a pitching prospect, but he pitched a ton at ECU. I think they like guys that are capable of doing both because of what it means for them mentally and what it means for them capability wise, physically. And I think they might have an affinity here for Bryce Rayner.
As a person who pitched and hit in high school, I can totally understand that, right? A guy who can understand both sides of the ball. No, you're coming from the like Peter Apple cloth. No, I
Yeah.
totally understand that. A real question for you, an actual question. How does Bryce Rayner, the top high school player in this draft, compare to other drafts with top prep guys like Max Clark, Walker Jenkins? You talked about Tamar Johnson, Jackson Holiday. Where is he ranked within those guys?
Hindsight is a benefit with like the Tamar Johnsons and stuff, but like relatively speaking here, I think not as much of the track record of some of these other guys. I'd say like just a half notch below. That's not to say that he won't be better than some of them. I just think in terms of the buzz, if I'm trying to measure that, feels like a half step behind those guys. But honestly, I think he could be just as good as many of them. And I think he's got a lot going on that if you look at them from just like a comparison standpoint, like what is Rayner deficient at? Like it's pretty hard to identify. So I wouldn't say that there's a specific area where some of those aforementioned players are better. I think you look at like a Max Clark tools wise, like he's in kind of in his own element. Jackson Holiday polish wise in his own element. Walker Jenkins, both polish and projection wise, kind of in his own element. But then I think Rayner could be grouped with some of those others and is right there.
Let's go to number 6. You have the Royals taking Chase Burns, the dude with plenty of fuel out of Wake Forest, right-handed pitching prospect. Some people who are really, really high on Chase Burns, or at least, I've listened to their shows or, read their articles, they say he could have as much upside as a guy like Paul Skeens, considering that he can sit in triple digits and just blow gas by guys. Now, me personally, when I watch Chase Burns and watch Paul Skeens, I don't think they're in the same conversation. I just think Paul Skeens is like on another level, and I don't think it's fair to compare Chase Burns to a guy like Paul Skeens. I think that's putting too much on his plate. That said, he's an extremely exciting arm and one that Royals fans would be ecstatic to have, correct?
I mean, in a scenario here where he kind of falls into their lap, they'd be thrilled with that because the Royals are casting a wide net. They could go bat, they could go any direction. This would be a scenario where the decision's kind of made for them. Now Skeens is, I think Skeens is on a different level. I've seen that floated a little bit too. Skeens is able to hold his velocity on a different level. I think that's clear. And that was something that, like in February, we saw Burns, a little bit higher. And then, he did slip a tad, but then regained it and was right kind of back to where we're used to seeing him. But I think the fastball quality, like it's not quite there compared to Skeens. Like I think it's funny that people are talking about Skeens shape and then
Not
we're
talking
not
about
hearing it as
Burns.
much with Burns, which Burns does get good ride, but it's from a very high release point. And like again, it's funny how that works. And also it's 90, 98, which is gas. That's fuel, but it's not 101
Yeah.
consistently. That said, his slider is probably, I mean, it's him and Hagen Smith, but like it's one of the better pitches you're going to see really in any draft. Opponents slashed 085, 136, 135, or 138 against it. That's good for like a 270 something OPS. Like that's a disgusting pitch in the upper 80s. He'll mix in like a banger curveball as well. Still trying to find the consistent feel for the changeup, but like this is a guy that's going to be able to climb quickly, throws enough strikes, even if the fastball shape isn't perfect, like it's upper 90s, it's gonna work. Yeah, this is about the floor for him, in my opinion. And the only reason why I think he slips here is because I have a theory on the Rockies. We talk about types. We'll get into that in a moment. And I think they could go with a type there. This would be a dream scenario for the Royals, given what Burns can do and what he's been able to show. And he could definitely climb very, very quickly.
Before we get into those types and before we get into the top 5, I want to talk to you guys about game time. So we've all found ourselves in a situation somewhat similar to this. You see that there's a great pitching matchup that you're willing to drive an hour or two for, or a concert that popped up out of nowhere. So you go scanning for tickets, and then there's roadblocks galore, no good deals, nothing at the last minute. List goes on. Let's fix that for you. New friend of the show is Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. That's why I love Game Time. And with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, that's key here, lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Use Game Time for last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. List goes on. Yes, you get the lowest price guarantee and panoramic seat views, but I personally love the all-in pricing. Use this toggle feature so you know that what you're getting into and you're not hit with the classic, holy smokes, how many fees are there feeling at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code JUSTBASEBALL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And again, create an account and redeem code JUSTBASEBALL for $20 off. Go to the profile section, put in that code, and you'll get that money off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. You can find that in the episode description. You ready for the top 5?
Yes, sir.
Let's get into the top 5. And at number 5, wow. We have a new number 1 overall pick in this draft. And Charlie Condon has been getting a lot of allure for the number 1 overall pick. But Arm's going with Charlie Condon at number 5 to the Chicago White Sox. 5 seems low.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. Why is he at 5?
We'll talk about the fits with other teams. I think when you look at the top of this draft, and this is where it gets really interesting. Rockies cross them out by all intents and purposes. Sounds like they're going with an arm, unless it's Jack Caglione. I know they sent scouts out there to go see him, but also I know that they were very present. The most important people were present for the pitchers. I would expect the Rockies to go with an arm. So there goes, one of the top 5 spots for a bat. Guardians go under slot, which we'll get to. All of a sudden we get a rattle off of okay, how many spots could Condon go before this? The Reds, it could go any way, but it sounds like they don't prefer Condon compared to some of these other bats, which we'll get to. And then, as I mentioned earlier, like I think it's become more commonplace that Caglione is ahead of Condon. The concern was like, okay, yeah, well, Caglione's a first baseman, and he's not a two-way guy. Like I think that's going to be taken even less seriously now, considering that his velo really dropped at the end of the year. I think there might be something wrong, there. We'll see. They pulled him early, at the end of his last outing there, pitching wise, but that never really was in the cards. We talked about that way back, that we felt like he was a guy that really profiled best offensively. When you look at Condon and Caglione, very similar. I think Caglione does the things that they both do well better. And I think he hedges some of the concern a little bit more than, people think. Like Condon better approach for sure. And then you look at the bat to ball, like you'd be surprised, man. Like Caglione has better contact skills, and really even with the expansive approach, like can get to balls outside of the zone. The more I've dug into Condon, the more and I like him. Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, when we have our top, draft rankings, like he's going to be near the top. I have some concerns about the ability to hit secondary stuff, and watching that, and then diving into the data afterwards, it was somewhat validating. Like he put up good statistical numbers, but when you saw him against better competition, I think this is something that kind of swayed scouts maybe a little bit more towards Caglione. 90% contact rate against fastballs is ridiculous. Not in zone, 90% contact rate, period. Like that's crazy. But that contact rate drops to 68% on breaking balls and 68% on changeups. Not terrible, but not great. And that discrepancy is a little bit concerning because it's not like he's giving you value beyond the bat either. Like it might be a little bit better than Caglione because he can maybe, be hidden at, get by at third or get hidden in a corner outfield spot. But realistically, you're getting all the value from the bat. And if you're not letting defense decide this thing here, it's which bat do you think has higher upside and which bat do you think is less risky? They're both have a lot of upside. They're both relatively risky. I think Caglione has more upside, and I think the risk is you can take your pick, right? Aggressive approach, a little bit more whiff. What's more risky to you? That's going to be in the eyes of the beholder there. I'll take the left-handed bat. I think that, has a little bit more of the track record here. And for that reason, you kind of have Condon just fall right into the White Sox lap.
I mean, the White Sox fans, I know they just heard that, but that's being compared to some of the top guys in this draft. If they were to get Charlie Condon at number 5, they'd be extremely excited. And you kind of covered why Jack Caglione might go in front of him, and you have him at number 4 to the Oakland A's. Do you want to touch on those two? Anything else before we move on to number 3?
Yeah, I think, it's one of those spots where I could see the A's going any direction, but it just seems to make a lot of sense here. With the upside, obviously, with a guy that can also climb quickly, and I could see them going any direction for sure. But I think they have a little bit more of the priority on the bat to ball side, and they're willing to be more patient with the approach. And it seems to be something that they prioritize a little bit more. I think Caglione, again, it's more of just the consensus of, I think people will just have him ranked ahead. And I'm assuming that the A's scouts feel that way. Maybe not. They might like Condon more. Every team's different. I remember being in the Marlins. It ended up both of them kind of being wrong anyways, but I remember covering the Marlins draft when I was still writing for the Fish and doing stuff for Locked On Marlins and Fish on First. And we asked them after they got JJ Bleday, like, was that exactly what you wanted? And they said that the war room, or the draft room, let out a collective cheer when Andrew Vaughn was selected before him. I preferred Vaughn at the time. It turns out, I guess you could be wrong either way with those guys. But I think it's funny. A lot of other teams prioritize Vaughn, and here the Marlins are letting out a collective roar that Bleday fell into their lap. So you never know with these teams, but I'd like to think that I'll side with what I'm hearing more with the masses, which is Caglione slightly ahead of Charlie Condon.
But ahead of both of them, you have the number 1 pitcher going off the board to the Rockies. And you just feel that the Rockies are going to take Hagen Smith at number 3. That's what we have in Mock Draft 3.0. Is there a chance that they go with Chase Burns? Yeah. Or is there even a larger chance they go hitter? Or are they definitely going pitcher here? And it's just, which one is it?
So the word is Burns seems to be the favorite to go here. I think that could be a little bit of a smokescreen. This is more of a gut pick, like you like to say.
I love that.
Because I know they're in on Smith, and I think I would guess that it's let's say it's 50-50 with or 40-40, and then you sprinkle in Caglione there with the remaining 20%. And that might be, aggressive there. I'm looking at a situation here where they could probably save a little bit more money with the Hagen Smith. And if they could do that, they also have a compensation pick later that, I think it was 31 or one of those selections where they could use those savings. And if they see these guys as kind of 1A, 1B, and Hagen Smith has a higher chance of being a little bit cheaper, that could be one side of it.
And it's also the lefty. The lefty element of it is huge.
And that's the big gut pick for me. the Rockies love funky lefties. Love them. Love them. They took Sean Sullivan last year. They took Carson Palmquist the year before that, and those were second, third round picks. And those guys have been great for them. If you look at what they've been trying to do in the bullpen at times, and they want those funky lefties. And Hagen Smith fits that bill, but with all the sliders turned up, right? Like he is funky lefty, but he's really freaking good.
Yeah,
he's gross.
He's no Ryan Yarbrough. He's more Carlos Rodon.
Yeah, which is like that's scary. And I think it fits the bill for them. And I think the more that they start to dive into that, it makes a lot more sense. I think also at altitude there, like you need, there's a reason why they're going for that. Like the way that the horizontal plays up from that release point and the way that like, if your fastball is not getting as much vert, deception is huge. And Chase Burns, the guy that his fastball did not perform that well relative to what you'd expect. You know, OPS was around 900 against it. Whereas Hagen Smith, opponents had a sub 600 OPS against his fastball. So I think they're going to look at that and say, hey, this is a guy that's going to translate to cores a lot better. And I think make a lot more sense. Maybe they don't. And again, it's the Rockies. So like, who the hell knows what they're thinking? This is what I would do if I were there. And this is the trend that they tend to go with. I wouldn't be shocked. This is my gut pick here. And it seems to make a lot of sense, but I do think they go pitcher. It's so hard to get people to come pitch there anyways. And they need to take advantage of the opportunities to add arms. They took Dollander last year. That looks like it's paying off for them. And I think they do it again here.
And we'll get into pick number 2. I think this guy is your favorite pick in the draft, but you don't have him going number 1, which promotes a fun conversation. So at number 2, you have the Cincinnati Reds taking Travis Bazzana, second base prospect from Oregon State, a guy who is from Australia, has played in some really talented leagues before coming over to Oregon State and just pulverizing the baseball at every single stop. But he's a second baseman, Arm, or is he? What do you think about Travis Bazzana?
I mean, I would love to throw him out in center and see what it looks like. But of course, you're drafting the bat. He's such a gamer. And I think he's a guy that's just going to crush all the draft interviews, and people are going to just love the way he goes about his business. He's a psycho in the best way possible. But this is just a special talent all the way around. Yeah, the people are looking at like, oh, like look how he did at the end of the year and against SEC. What? No, it has nothing to do with anything. He can hit anything. This was one of the more fun video dives I did. Like some of the pitches that he hit out were ridiculous. It's all fields. The question was power, right? What does he do? Adds a ton of power. Yes, there are some components to EVs being up in college baseball, and I'm working on a story on that. Pretty wild. Some of the data there. There was definitely something different with the baseballs this year, but you can't even attribute that to what Bazzana did from a power output perspective. Like this was a guy that found something, added some strength, went to drive line, found it, and it clearly translated. Imagine this guy in Great American Ballpark too. I mean, the power, the way it would play there.
The thing is, though, I'm also imagining Condon and Caglione also in that ballpark too. Like, I think all these guys are so powerful that I can envision all of them in Great American Ballpark.
I know. But what's fun about Bazzana is he makes so much contact that like these doubles are going to turn into homers. And like, I'm thinking about like, look at like what TJ Friedel's doing out there. Like, I think this guy is so much more talented than that. Like he could put up insane numbers.
Imagine that up the middle duo, Ellie and Bazzana. Yeah, we'll take that. We will take that.
Yeah. And you put like McLean at third or something. Like, holy crap.
You got him too. Well,
like,
what about Noelvi Marte?
They got some stuff to iron out. That's a good problem to have, right? Like trouble in paradise there.
Remember how the Reds had too many middle infield prospects, and now like Santiago Espinal is like a main piece of their lineup right now?
We just talked about him last. He's DHing.
I do have a question about Travis Bazzana. And now I'm putting my scout hat on, Arm. You're not worried at all? Because the Pac-12 is not that great a competition. And he destroyed them. Good for him, right? You can only play about who's in front of you. Then he gets into SEC play, and he doesn't perform like we thought he would. Now, the other guys, like Caglione, dragged his team to Omaha when they're 33-29, and Oregon State was legit. They were one of the best teams in college baseball, and I would know because I had a future on them, and I freaking lost. You're not worried about that at all? Because you kind of glossed over that, and I'm pretty surprised that you did.
It's so hard for me to dive into like the small samples because sure, it could be
True,
right.
It was such a small sample.
But like it could also just been like not seeing the ball well. And now it's like, I think about Chase DeLauder, and Chase DeLauder, when he was at JMU, everyone's like, oh, let's see him against real competition. Let's see him against real competition, even though he performed on the Cape. And that's what Bazana did too. And that helps me too. Like watching him do it with Wood and tear up the Cape helps a lot. But you had DeLauder go against FSU and get bullied by Parker Messick. I'm trying to remember who else was there at the time.
But he did drop. He did drop in this draft.
Yeah,
right?
I think it was more the
concerns.
injury. Yeah, and then if you redrafted, well, now he got hurt again. But like from a production and talent perspective, like he shouldn't have fallen. Oh. So I think it's valid, and it is worth noting. Like I'm even looking at just like the average fastball velocity that he saw versus others. Like I think the average fastball velocity he saw was 90. These other guys are seeing like on average like 91 and change. Like that does matter for sure. And you got to kind of try to imagine what it would look like, and that's why I don't envy the people that have to do amateur scouting. Amateur scouting is a lot harder than scouting professionally, I think, because you're trying to compare these guys that are hitting a lot of pitches that they'll never see in pro ball. Like it's really like a lot of the pitches that these guys are hitting out, they might get once a week in pro ball in terms of just like bad cement mixers or just the quality of the pitch. If you're looking at like Stuff Plus, let's say. So it is worth considering. And it is something that could, like, a couple of teams might say, well, at this point, like, I'll just go with Cags. Like, but Cags does come with a little bit more implied volatility from the offensive profile perspective. So you can kind of run in circles with it. I do think it's valid to have those questions, considering that, you know, he didn't play against as good a competition. I do think that might be enough for, you know, the Guardians to say, hey, let's just go with a player that might be just as good and we'll save some money at number one. But I think Bazana kind of compensates for a lot of those things with the off the charts makeup and work ethic that he just continues to get lauded for. One thing to note, though, that is a little bit interesting is I did expect him to perform a bit better against, you know, breaking balls from a consistency perspective. Might have just been, you know, like a little bit of just like him slugging them more than hitting them for average. Like he did hit plenty of home runs against breaking balls, but average against breaking balls wasn't quite as good. So it is something to kind of be aware of, and it could be something that affects him, but the contact rates were still really strong there. And again, what he can do from an adjustability perspective, from the ability to just get to pitches in ridiculously tough places, I just think he's a rare talent.
But we have a new number 1 overall pick. It is not Jack Caglione. It's not Hagen Smith or Chase Burns, the pitchers. It is not Charlie Condon either. And it's not Travis Bazana. Aram, who is the new number 1 pick in the 2024 MLB draft?
I think it's going to be JJ Weatherholt. I think you could do a coin flip here, right? Very easily could be Bazana as well. And this is where, in this range, in the top 5, I think it comes down to the money and you know, how these negotiations go. And if JJ Weatherholt's steadfast on a high price tag, then maybe it's not. I think it's very likely that he's going to be cheaper than some of these other top guys. And the gap talent-wise is not very big, especially after Weatherholt came back. Remember, this was a guy that was floated as the 1-1 pick. And in our first mock before the year, we had him at 1-1. He has a chance to play short, which helps. You know, Bazana is definitely second base. I still think that ultimately Weatherholt probably moves to second, but he's got a shot to play a passable short, which does help. But looking from an offensive perspective, comes out swinging it pretty well, messes up the hammy, comes back and goes nuts. And I think being able to finish strong the way that he did, hitting the ball hard, hitting for average, like it is one of the more well-rounded offensive profiles you're going to find, because the bat speed, I think, is up there with just about anybody. It's one of my favorite swings in the draft, period. Like the way he's able to stay in the zone for so long, but still be so quick and efficient to the ball is very rare. When you look at what he does approach-wise, chase rate below 15%, like you're not going to find that too often from a guy that also makes contact at like an 85% clip. Just a lot of components to the offensive profile that you just don't see very often. And I would have been concerned if he didn't come back and do what he did, but coming back off the hammy and doing what he did, as long as he can prove to teams and sell teams on the fact that this hamstring thing won't continue to be a nagger, because it was something that went back to last year as well. Like as long as they can see that, believe that it's not going to keep coming back and keep nagging him, I think it's a no-brainer that, if you can save a lot of money, you have the biggest bonus pool here. When are the Guardians going to pick number one again? I'd venture to say maybe like not for
Never.
multiple decades.
Yeah,
It could legitimately be like never again. This is an opportunity for the Guardians to really load up the farm system. And if you think that Weatherholt and Bazana are not that far apart, and you have the biggest bonus pool, you could get really creative here. Like it's not, teams aren't as excited about the number one pick as they are the bonus pool that comes with that, having that number one selection. And having such a large pool allows them to do a lot of crazy things. They could end up signing multiple first round pick caliber prospects because they could throw mid first round money at whoever with that 36th pick. We talked about Cash Mayfield. They might be able to shoot higher than that with someone that slips out of the first and says, you know what, don't draft me, I'm not going to sign. And then all of a sudden they're able to meet that price tag. So they could get really creative. And I'm knowing the Guardians and the way they kind of like to go about things. If Bazana's price tag is that much higher, I think Weatherholt makes all the sense in the world for them at number one, where the talent gap I don't think is very big. And you could do a lot more with the rest of the draft.
So you said something that's really interesting to me, that this is kind of the Guardians' way, and they may not be able to pick number one for a very, very long time. And I totally agree with you. Is there an element to you that says, because it's going to be their number one overall pick for probably the first time in a very long time, let's spend the money now. Let's go get Bazana. Let's go get Condon or Caglione, whoever we think is the best overall player in the draft. And they say, screw saving money for the back end. Or do you think this is the right decision and most likely where they actually go?
It's a great question, because I think if there was a clear cut number one guy, for sure. I'm a big proponent of that. Like, don't get cute with it. Don't overthink it. Like, if there's a guy there, take him. I think Bazana is the best player in the draft, but like, again, the stuff that you alluded to, like, it's not enough to put me off him, but it's valid. Like,
Yeah.
and there's some
He's
questions with each of these guys. No, like, I think if Paul Skeens or Dylan Cruz is in this draft, or like, now we know in Wyatt Langford with the benefit of hindsight, like, each of those guys, probably I take them at one and you don't think about it. But in a situation here where you have a lot of like secondary defensive players, in terms of like, it's not primary position, premium positions here. And a lot of them are they got sneaky pop, but it's either big power, and not, kind of anchored to a spot, or really good bat to ball and playing second base type. Like, you could kind of justify, like, okay, if the difference, they might have Bazana at number one on their board, but if they think the difference is marginal, I guarantee the difference will be way larger in who they would be able to pick with, 2 million less or $1.5 million less in spending at 36 versus what they could if they have that spending ability. So I think for them, it's almost like trading back a couple spots in the first round, still being able to get whoever you wanted, and out of the trio of guys that they think are right there, 1A, 1B, 1C, and then you could go get another first round pick basically at 36, or go get multiple high upside guys later on. I think with the way this draft shakes out too, we talked about some of those fun prep arms, and there's some fun prep shortstops as well. It could make a lot of sense to approach it that way. And knowing the Guardians, they might feel like, oh, we might not have an opportunity to pick number one, but I think they'll think more, we might not have an opportunity to have this much flexibility with this large of a bonus pool, and like, let's go crazy and have some fun with it. And I think they're going to.
Well, you did a phenomenal job on this mock draft, and that wraps up Mock Draft 3.0 here on the Just Baseball Show and on justbaseball.com. Make sure to go read it. That is linked in the episode description. When's 4.0 coming out? I'm already titillated.
That'll probably be the final one. So probably in about a week and a half.
Hell yeah. Everyone be out on the look for that on justbaseball.com, and as well here on the Just Baseball Show. And if you enjoyed these big time breakdowns, make sure to leave a 5-star review, whether that be on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you enjoyed watching this on YouTube, hit that big red subscribe button. We got videos coming out for you every single weekday. For Arm Layden, I am Peter Apple, and we'll see you tomorrow, of course. And with that, thank you, everybody.